for those of you associated with my dad's side of the family, any kind of remote association or whatnot, you may be familiar with my paternal aunt, Patsy Reedy Wecker. However, we always called her Aunt Pat. Aunt Pat was a very inspirational woman. One photo that I don't have in the slideshow is a photo I vividly remember. It was, Aunt Pat. I think it may have been on the patio of Grandma and Grandpa Reedy's house, and I remember the patio had flooring that was similar to maybe these minute green bristles, a whole pad of minute green bristles, and that's the best I can equate it to. And Aunt Pat was like sitting on a porch chair, and so rejoiceful. And this was around when we lived in Illinois before 1983, and it was like before Aunt Pat's hair went totally white. At that time, it was in the salt and pepper phase, but I found that photo. I don't know what happened to it, and I guess my family doesn't know what happened to it, but in a collection of these tactile, paper photos. Back whenever, it was all doing it the old school film way. Thinking of that photo gives me nostalgia. Being that I'm apparently autistic, I always have music playing in my head. Well, I've had music playing in my head all my life, and whenever I reenact, that photo, the song in my mind, the rhythm and blues song that goes something like, where do we go, playing in my head, which is true. If I don't make a whole lot of sense tonight, I don't seem to make a whole lot of sense just because I had to be to work at 5 a.m. for inventory and I'm brain dead, but been meaning to get this video up for a while. I have Googled online these past week or so to try and find my Aunt Pat's obituary. I was wanting to, show it's on video with all else, but been able to, come across it. Aunt Pat, she was a very sincere woman. We lived in Illinois before 1983, and Aunt Pat and my Uncle Daryl, which was her husband, would come visit us at our Illinois home. And also it was vice versa. We would go visit Pat and Daryl at their house. And in my mind, I could go on and on all day, but kind of keep it in a nutshell before I get to the real accentuation. Their house in my mind was maybe a dream palace, a palace that contained the amenities of my obsessions. Don't really have time to elaborate, but Pat and Daryl had a really nice pristine house when they lived in Illinois. and I always enjoyed it when we would go visit them. Whenever we moved to Tennessee, before Dad left Mom, we would hear from Pat and Daryl throughout the years. There were actually was a time or two Aunt Pat and Uncle Daryl would vacate to Gatlinburg, Tennessee. We would go visit them in Gatlinburg. My whole memory of Aunt Pat, very sincere woman. She loved, to talk and carry on conversation. She was very friendly, always ready to, give a listening ear to whatever was on your mind. She would always come up with her own objects of her conversation, very sincere woman. Aunt Pat, I forget what she did for a living before she retired, but from the sounds of it, whatever she did, she was a real diligent worker with whatever she did. Fondest memory is the fall of '89 when we went to visit Pat and Daryl in Gatlinburg. By the way, my Uncle Daryl died in about 2017, and this was back before I was doing all these tribute videos. I'll kind of accentuate a little bit about Daryl too, but main pinnacle is my Aunt Pat since it's her recent death. We met at this pancake house. Good old, pancakes. Me, Dad, my sisters, all there at that, excellent cuisine in that maybe kind of like a country style restaurant. Pat and Daryl conversed with us. And then it was digressed that we had a controversy with our neighbors, in Riceville. A big old controversy where they tried to build a fence to prohibit us from going up the trail to our pasture on top. And I cut the wires to that, gate. And it got kind of more heated from there, but when Aunt Pat heard about that, she goes, "Sam, I'm glad he cut the fence, serves him right." And Dad said to me, "Don't let that encourage you to do more, things like that." And kept on conversing about, family, what have you, what's going on in the family. Sat there, I enjoyed my pancakes, we enjoyed the conversation, and about the whole time we were all conversing with Aunt Pat, there was this old apartment, maybe a hotel building, guess whatever we can equate it to, but it had these dormer windows. And it had an old metal window fan in the window there above the roof. And I spent the whole time staring at that, metal antique window fan. The window fan was turned on and could literally see the motion of the blades as the fan was turned on. And I kept on staring at that, so mesmerized as they were conversing away. But yeah, I just remember that old fan in the window in whatever complex that was. And then we went to the convention center and we saw all these crafts from under the hot sun, all these bazaars right there in the center. We looked around and very pristine displays, when this elderly man was real crafty with building these windmills. as a turbine, spin, it would activate a homemade water wheel. It was, very aesthetic. And there was this booth with wind chimes with an elderly man sitting right there at the bazaar, and he had an antique General Electric, a table fan, had it turned on, and that kind of fan with no protection that could cut your fingers off, and he had that thing turned on, and that was blowing the wind chimes, and the wind chimes were, kind of like, the cadence of music. And I also saw this really, really heavy set midget walking around. And I stared off in the distance, and there was also this really short police officer as the guy, really short, heavy set police officer. So I kind of remember vividly the faces that I saw. Song. For a while, as I was reenacting all of this, the song "Deeper and Deeper" by Madonna played in my head as I was reenacting, my favorite scenery in that memory. "Deeper and Deeper" by Madonna. Within the last 6 years, my mom and my sisters have commuted all the way to Texas. Pat and Daryl ended up commuting to Texas, relocating there. I forget which part, but Daryl died. Since he died in 2017, my family didn't get to visit him, but they got to see Aunt Pat. They got to see my Uncle Jim before he died also, and the whole, a portion of the Reedy clan, and they had a good time. If I'm thinking correctly, they took a trip back in 2019, and it looks like they took a trip in 2023. A very, very glamorous, time. What I can say about my Aunt Pat is throughout the years, since they lived all the way in Texas, all the way in Illinois and then Texas, didn't get to hear a whole lot from them. But Aunt Pat was a type of woman that if I talked to her just for a few minutes via Facebook, when I used to have Facebook, or talking to her on the phone, which I've gotten to do, or just in text messages, even though I didn't see Aunt Pat all this time, it was like, I had known her for years, because Aunt Pat was that kind of woman, a woman of integrity, sincerity, ready to converse. I could talk to Pat maybe once every 10 to 15 years, but she's the kind of woman I feel like, I've been in contact with her all along, since she was that kind of woman. Yeah, Aunt Pat will be missed, and unfortunately, you could probably see in a lot of them photos that Aunt Pat was on, an oxygen tank. It was part of, it was a symptom, the cystic fibrosis of the lungs that she acquired, unfortunately. But we'll definitely, miss Aunt Pat for sure. R.I.P. Aunt Pat. You will be forever, in our hearts.